The IRS is sending letters to more than 36 million families who may qualify for the newly expanded child tax credit. Under the plan, families could be eligible to receive up to $300 per child per month until December.
Joining us to weigh in on this, the funky academic himself, doctoral student Irami-Osei Frimpong. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a good topic to talk about. I mean, I appreciate the child credit because it's an anti-poverty program that explicitly makes it easier to fulfill an institutional role, Parenthood, right? So, and we don't talk about this enough in society, but it's through participating in and governing these institutional roles that we determine meaning in our life, right? So I'm going to go rather fast and you'll tell me everything that I'm doing wrong. But it's good that we actually are targeting institutional roles and making it easier for people to participate in those institutional roles. And parenting is an important one for both society and a meaningful one for myself as a parent. So I think everyone has an interest in me parenting better, at least as well as I can. And that's good for society and good for my life, right? So I want to talk a little bit about how we screw up anti-poverty programs and why this one's actually particularly good. For example, take a living wage. Even saying a living wage is inhumane because, pigs live and slaves live and beasts of burden live. Living is only one way. Living is only winning when you've given up on self-determination. You don't want a living wage. You want discretionary income and power to shape your work, to shape your family life, to shape your social life, and to shape your political life. That's the promise of America, right? And insofar as we have a conception of poverty that supports living without a conception of poverty that supports self-determination, this conception of poverty that supports living could also support living in an authoritarian or a tyrannical society, right? So as it stands, we have this conception of poverty that's tied to material sustenance, which seems attractive, except it doesn't match with our democratic values. To be poor means you can't afford food or housing. But that conception of poverty actually distorts our democratic values because it'll enable anti-poverty programs that either calcify exploitation. I'm thinking about the Clinton workfare programs, where it allowed states to tie welfare payments to you're willing to work the most exploitative and fragile conditions in your region. It's an anti-poverty program that rewards exploitation.
So Irami, would you frame that? How would you frame this? What bucket would you put it into? As you're talking about reorienting our understanding of poverty, I'm thinking about it in terms of freedom, and I want to get your take on that. And rather than an anti-poverty program just simply depriving you of the material depredations that are causing you immediate physical harm, what an anti-poverty program could do is give you the freedom to actually then self-actualize.
Right. Participate and govern the institution, right? So let's say you're a pastor and the congregation is all on a UBI as an anti-poverty program, right? You still, as a pastor, are still, sermonizing to the richest families because they're the ones who are going to actually, their tithes are going to be the ones that fix the roof and you're not sermonizing for the people, you're still sermonizing for the richest people in the family. Now, compare that to a federal job guarantee at $25 an hour, right? So if everyone in your congregation has a federal job guarantee at $25 an hour, that means those tithes could actually do something. You're sermonizing for the people. Those people actually can have say in your church. That's actually them determining themselves and you serving the people. But it's in both ways, it's an anti-poverty program. But the latter is an anti-poverty program that goes after poverty and rights. Because if you don't have the rights, if you don't have access to a lawyer, if you can't pay a lawyer, if you can't afford to both quit and start a new job, or start your own business, or actually buy a house, if you have to do all of these things if you have an anti-poverty program that still depends on you doing all of these things on other people's terms indefinitely, then that's not actually a poverty of rights. That's
right. Well, the counter argument there, though, would be that you are on their terms. I want to get your response to this. I think the UBI advocates would say they'd reach back to what you said about Reagan's workfare program and say that, well, it's actually a deprivation of some freedom. You're in order to get this benefit from the government, you're being forced into this particular
You have to
activity.
actually
That is what I would say, yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, you have to actually participate and produce in society, but you're not doing it on vulnerable terms. You're not doing it for $8 an hour and like working for a fast food joint that will fire you as soon as your kid gets sick. You're doing it for $25 an hour at a unionized job. So yeah, everyone has to participate. That's America. Like that's how civil society should and ought to work. Everyone participates in building the material and cultural infrastructure.
So you said something. Go ahead. Finish your thought.
Yeah, everyone participates in building the cultural and material infrastructure that allows our civil society to function. But you participate like I said, in a unionized job with more than living wage, with actual wage where you have discretionary income, so that you can save and quit, start your own business. And if that doesn't go well, you go back to work in the job guarantee, right?
So earlier you
was that it put you on vulnerable terms. They expected you to work at $8 an hour at a job that could fire you at an instant.
You said something really interesting earlier, which is that everyone has an interest in you parenting better. And that was when we were talking specifically about this child tax credit that the IRS is trying to raise awareness of, and I think as they should be. So I'm wondering if you can walk us through the argument, because I think this is really at the crux of where there is a lot of disagreement between the right and the left. How does the child tax credit help you parent better? And that's not, that's more of a devil's advocate thing. I'm not saying it doesn't, but what is the argument for how that actually does create better parents?
So the U.S. came with a report. If I would have known, I'd came with that question. It pretty much takes $900 a month to raise a kid. Department of Labor, I don't know if it's labor statistics or the USDA. I want to say maybe it's the USDA. Anyway, it's actually expensive to raise a kid. I don't know if you have kids or anyone who hears this who has kids know this. That it's expensive to raise a kid well, right? So my kids take violin and cello lessons. I have to pay for that, and I do. And I pay for activities, and daycare is not cheap. So all of these things, it takes money, and it should take money, but we should actually have access to money to raise a kid that's a functional adult, right? Because the idea is if I screw up raising my kids, and when they become voting age, they're going to screw up our whole democracy, right? So you have an interest. My kids become your coworkers. Your kids become, unfortunately, my kids' bosses. It's just how it is. But I have an interest in you not screwing up your kids, because my kids have to deal with your kids in order for them to get meaning in their life.
Right. And also, Irami, previously I think I said that the child tax care credit expires in December, but that's not right. I think it goes until it's a one-year program, so it should go till the middle of last year. And Democrats are trying in the American Families Plan to extend it into 2025, and there's a lot of hope that they'll actually be able to do that. And because of the stimulus checks, the COVID checks that went out, the IRS now actually has a huge amount of information on how to get those checks, specifically to people. But I think you're exactly right, and I would say, there's a lot of resentment that is expressed around the idea of transferring wealth from people who don't have children to people who do have children. But I would say that the amount of labor and the amount of work that parents are doing to raise the next generation of people that are either going to make the world a better place, help grow the economy, help make you comfortable in your old age, and create the decent society that we all want, or they're not, or they're going to lead us into a place, like you said, where if the children aren't raised right, then you're going to have a bunch of old people complaining about this younger generation that screwed everything up. Well, then
the idea
do
is
what
that,
you can
you
collectively
don't want
to help.
my kids to mug your kids. You don't want my kids to mug your kids, and you don't want to have to pay higher a mortgage or move for the threat of to remove the threat of my kids mugging your kids. So the idea that we don't have a vested interest in healthy children becoming healthy adults in stable environments, both mentally and physically, is, I think, naive and is just not actually accurate, because it's very expensive to protect your kids from my kids. These gated communities and the private schools and the private infrastructure, it's very expensive.
Much cheaper to just make them good kids.
Real quickly, we have the same argument with school lunches, right? So even if your kid eats well at home and can bring a good brown bag lunch, I have an investment in school lunches being for every kid who's food insecure, because of that school lunch, that kid will be able to learn better. And because that kid will be able to learn better, that kid will be a better functional citizen in society. That society that kid shares with me and my kids, right? So it's not about we should feed kids in school because they're hungry. No, we should feed kids in school because school is an institution that prepares them for self-determination, and we need them to be able to be focused and paying attention in that institution so that when it's time to share power with other people in the community, they'll know how to do it in a magnanimous way.
And as a brief counterpoint, I will just add that 3 days a week in the early aughts, my school lunch was Pizza Hut, and I turned out fine.
Well, Pizza Hut has a lot of calories, so yeah.
Yes, it was nice.
Because it allowed you to focus, And so the anti-poverty program that's tied with bellies is going to be, it's not necessarily tied with democratic values, and it's going to court contradictions, especially when those anti-poverty programs are going to be tied to politically exploitative or socially exploitative programs. I think a lot of charities are actually socially exploitative, but they're anti-poverty.
Yes. No, I was just going to say, I think there's
tied to understanding these material needs as a condition to enable you to actually fulfill institutional roles, and the institutional roles that are meaningful. Those anti-poverty programs are actually consistent and consonant with our democratic values, and I think our duty to install as people who care about functioning self-governance.
And this all circles back to focusing more on community and our ties as a community on various different levels, which I think is important to people on both the right and the left. Irami, thank you so much for your time this morning.
No problem. This is a very important conversation. People don't talk about institutional roles and how to create meaning. We talk about bellies and we talk about houses. We don't talk about meaning and communities in the variegated and sophisticated way we need to actually, not throw away our lives.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, and that's the whole point of life, after all.
Not just more living.
So coming up, environmental attorney Stephen Donziger discusses his case when Rising returns.